Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of the World Wanderers. We're very excited to have you here with us today. This week on the podcast, we are very excited to be joined by our friend Nathan Aguilera. Nathan is the founder of Foodie Flashpacker, a food-focused travel blog aimed at helping followers discover the best dishes and where to find them around the world. Nathan is also a good personal friend, and if you're a close listener of the podcast, you've heard Nathan pop up a couple different times in different places. He's been on the World Wanderers Insider. He's been on episodes about a couple different things in Mexico. But we wanted to get him back to talk more about his story because we realized we never fully shared his story. And so Nathan is currently based in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and splits his time between Mexico in the winters and Europe in the summers. In the episode, we dive into what inspired Nathan to set out on a solo 6-month trip nearly 8 years ago, and how that trip turned into a lifestyle, and what's inspired him to start a food and travel blog, and how he's been able to turn that blog into a full-time income and more. So we think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Lots of great content, lots of great stories. And so without further ado, here's Nathan.
Welcome to the podcast today, Nathan. We're excited to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's going to be cool to kind of go through this. I think we know like a good chunk of your story and like obviously the parts that we've been involved with over the last couple of years, but just to kind of hear, you know, how you started traveling and how you created Foodie Flashpacker and all that good stuff. So can you tell us a little bit about like before you were nomadic, before you were traveling full time, you know, what you were doing and kind of what inspired you to take your trip?
Yeah, for sure. I was living in Oklahoma City. I was working at a corporate law firm as a legal assistant. I was managing their admin department there. And I had gone on a couple of longer trips. I did a couple of volunteer trips in Kenya and just became really, really obsessed with the idea of long-term travel. One of the trips to Kenya, I stayed in a hostel for my very first time, my friend David and I. And I met people who had been on the road for like 6+ months, people that had been traveling for more than a year. And I'd never been exposed to that. I'd never heard of that. I didn't even realize it was a possibility or whatever. And I kind of went down a rabbit hole and became obsessed with the idea and came back and started, you know, following a bunch of blogs and trying to figure out how I could do it myself. Some of my initial ideas, I was going to teach English in Korea. I had the idea to start a blog and things like this, and just spent, I wanted to be the most prepared long-term traveler that had ever hit the road. I planned on this trip for probably 18 months before I left.
And were you planning to like, I know you mentioned just a couple options to make money. Were you planning to make money, or was it like, hey, I'm going to go travel for a couple months and like use my savings?
Kind of both. Like I told everyone when I was leaving that I was going to be gone for 6 months, but in my head, I always knew that I wanted to be gone for at least a year. But I kind of felt like saying that was, it was too much. Like everyone would be supportive of a 6-month plan, but if you said you were going to leave for a year, I thought that sounded too crazy. So I left with enough savings for a year. But kind of on a 6-month plan. And definitely when I got closer to the 6-month point, I knew that there was no way that I felt like my trip was anywhere close to being wrapped up. So at that point, I extended it for a year. And I knew that if I wanted to go any further than that, I was probably going to have to start figuring out some ways to make money on the road. So how to make money on the road was always a bit of like a backup plan once the savings ran out.
And for you, where did so you had those early travels going to Africa, going to other places. Where did the idea come from of like, hey, I want to travel for a full year, or whether it was 6 months, whether it was a year, but just like that idea of, hey, I want to do this for a really long time. Kind of what made you interested in going for a long trip?
I met some people in that hostel in Mombasa in Kenya and got very excited about the idea. And when I started following a lot of travel blogs, in the beginning, I was following Nomadic Matt and Adventurous Kate and all these other bloggers and reading about their long-term trips. And I don't know, I kind of felt like I had a really, really great life in Oklahoma City. I had a good job, great friends and family and everything. But I kind of felt like sitting on the 17th floor of this law firm in Oklahoma City, and I'm reading about all these adventures people are having in Thailand and South America and things like this. I kind of felt like my life was a little bit, I don't know, I hate to say passing me by, because I had a great situation in Oklahoma City, but I don't know. I felt like there was more out there that I wanted to do and go explore and see. And I wasn't seeing as much as I wanted to see sitting still in Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like we can both relate to that. And it's kind of like, I remember our first backpacking trip and we were doing 6 months. I think like gap years are a little bit more common for Canadians than Americans. Like I think there's more and more Americans doing it now, which is really awesome. But, a decade ago, it was like less common. But meeting people who were like doing it longer than that, or people who were working abroad. And I feel like that was like such a crazy concept to me. Like, oh, you can just travel indefinitely. Like I need to figure out how to do that. That's cool.
Yeah, I think stage one was, probably most everyone that I was following. I didn't know probably a lot of these bloggers were making money as they traveled. I figured it was savings or something like this. So step one was, a long-term trip. And then the more I got into it and the more I wanted to stay on the road and continue my own trip, was figuring out how people were traveling indefinitely and making money at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. And we definitely want to talk about that transition and stuff. But for that first leg of the trip where you were kind of more like relying on savings and stuff, where did you go? Like, did you have some pretty big like bucket list items that you wanted to check off, or what was that trip like?
Mostly Southeast Asia. I was all over Southeast Asia. I was so obsessed with Thailand at the time. I feel like Thailand, I would go from Thailand to Hong Kong, back to Thailand, Malaysia, back to Thailand. Like I hardly left Thailand. And then I started seeing someone and he was European, and he got me into the idea of visiting Europe. And so I started, going to Europe over the summers and kind of started dividing my time like that. I'd spend the summer in Europe and then go back to Southeast Asia, mainly focus on Thailand in the winters.
What was it about Thailand that kind of spoke to you?
It was just it still is. I mean, it's just so exotic and it's so different. And, when I wanted to go experience new cultures and go to different places around the world, it felt like Thailand was about as far away from home as I could get. And culturally, just very different from what I was used to growing up in the United States. And, it's gorgeous and the beaches and it's affordable. So, my savings went a lot further, but definitely it felt as far away as I could get from home, very exotic and culturally just crazy different than what I was used to. I had culture shock, but in kind of the best possible way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember feeling culture shock when we got to Thailand too, just like getting out of the taxi. I think we got out of the taxi, we stayed on like Khao San Road, which is like such an early 20s backpacker mistake to do, or I guess just thing to do in general, but just being like so overwhelmed. Like there's so many lights and so many noises and so many smells and just all the things going on. But then you kind of integrate and you're like, oh, this place is amazing. And like the food's incredible in Thailand and all the other things you mentioned as well. I think Thailand's definitely a place that we love too.
It's become a bit of, a cliche for like where backpackers go, or, a lot of bloggers used to base at least out of Chiang Mai, but pre-COVID and all that. But it's so popular for a reason. I mean, Thailand is amazing. And I've found a lot of other places on my travels that are amazing. But in the beginning, if you're kind of wanting to dip your toes in and go somewhere relatively safe, affordable, exotic, interesting, tons of things to see and do, like you're saying, the food is amazing. I think, Thailand is a good starting point for a reason. There's a reason so many people start there.
Yeah, I think that as well, like when you're doing more of those backpacking trips and taking longer adventures, when you find those places that just have a ton of value for your money, it's hard to go back. I know for us, we backpacked through Europe and we're just living, super, super cheap on a budget. And then we get to Southeast Asia and we're like, oh, we can really like live it up here and spend less money than we were paying to eat like deli meat and like bread from the grocery store.
For sure. And I love Europe and I spend a lot of time there. A lot of years I spent about half a year in Europe, but it's not as much culture shock as you're going to get in Asia, largely for me. A lot of stuff in Europe is beautiful and it's nice and interesting and the food is good and things like this. But most things happen about like you think that they're going to happen or you expect them to happen in Europe, especially Western Europe. Whereas in Asia, I feel like a lot of times I'm just like, what the hell is going on? None of this makes sense. Like, why is it like this? But, in a great way.
And then, so when did you start thinking that, you had told people it was 6 months, in your head, you'd been thinking a year. When did you start thinking like, I don't really want to go back to the same life. I want to try to find a way to do this for an even more extended period?
I would say probably around approaching the 2-year mark. After 6 months, I kept extending by 6-month increments. I'd say I'm going to stay on another 6 months, stay on another 6 months, stay on another 6 months. And around the 2-year mark, I think I finally just said, like, this is what I'm doing for the foreseeable future. I don't have any plans of coming home anytime soon. I'll come home to visit as much as possible. But, I stopped extending by 6-month increments. And also that's when I was quickly figuring out that I was going to have to make some money. The savings was almost gone about that time.
Yeah, I'm curious for you, like what the response was from friends and family, because I know for us, when we were kind of like, okay, we're just going to like continue doing this, people were a little bit like, what? Like, you're just not going to like come back and get like normal jobs and stuff like that. There was a little bit of like, I guess the shock factor and maybe like some pushback from some family and friends. Like, what was the reactions like when you kind of were like extending, and then you're finally just like, this is like the new life I'm living?
I think at that point, overwhelmingly supportive because they had like a 2-year buffer,
You like expecting it at that point?
Yeah, I think so. Like they had 2 years of me being gone, and I kept continually extending. So I don't think anyone was surprised when I just said like, this is kind of what I'm going to be doing from here on out.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. And so for you, like, where did the idea of creating a food blog come from?
I was hanging out with a bunch of blogger friends in Chiang Mai, and I'd had the idea of starting a blog. But once you kind of get in the community and you make friends and you see that people are doing it and they're having success with it and, able to sustain themselves in their travels, it became more of a real idea for me. And our friends, Meg and Tom, that from Food Fun Travel, in the beginning, when I started my blog, they let me kind of drive them crazy, asking them every newbie question that was probably very annoying for them, for me to start asking like super basic questions or whatever. But having a little bit of that support and having friends that were doing it, that certainly made it easier.
Yeah, for sure. And so from the time of like starting a blog, like how long did it take you before you made like, maybe let's say like your first $1 off of it?
Well, the first year, I know I lost money. By the time I bought all these courses and training and, registering a domain and blah, 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 all this other stuff. And if I made any money that year, it didn't touch what I'd spent starting it. During the second year, I was making some money, not great money. And I would say during like year 3, if you were on a backpacker budget, you could probably, year 3, I could have sustained myself off my blog.
Okay, that's cool. And were you traveling like this whole time? Like kind of, were you into your groove of like half the year in Thailand, half the year in Europe at this point? Like still kind of going to new places and whatnot? Or were you kind of like just based in one place?
I would base myself in Thailand and then, travel all around Southeast Asia, definitely going slower than in the beginning. In the beginning, I was, doing an entire country in like 2 or 3 days and changing countries, flying through, kind of just checking things off a list, really. But I was, by that point, I was going slower, but still doing a lot of travel. And then in Europe, when I would go to Europe for the summers, I move about a lot more when I'm in Europe for the summers than I do when I take like a winter base. But I was definitely traveling more then than I am now. I'm definitely in the slow mad category at this point.
Yeah, for sure. We are too. And we'll get to that part of your journey. I'm curious. So at this point, you're like, you've been working on your blog for a couple of years. You're like kind of based in Thailand, traveling to Europe quite a bit. What year was this?
Oh, wow. So I left in 2015. 2014. So this must have been like 2017, 18, somewhere around there.
Okay. I was just trying to piece where like our paths crossed in your story. Cause I think we met in the fall of 2016, right? In Asia?
Yeah, I think so. In the Philippines.
Yeah, I know we met in the Philippines. I don't remember when that conference was. That was one of my first, maybe my first conference I'd ever been to.
And then, so for you going through this transition of like, hey, I'm just out here backpacking, I've got savings, the way you kind of inform your decisions is just like, I want to go check this place out. And then making the transition into actually trying to, create content based off your travels, become a professional travel blogger. How did that affect the way you were traveling and the way you kind of were experiencing different places you were going to?
Well, I mean, I definitely heard someone say one time, and I agree with it. Like, if you're traveling, you're not blogging, or if you're blogging, you're not traveling. Or you could really apply that towards like, if you're traveling, you're not working, or working, you're not traveling. It's really difficult to do both at the same time. And I definitely was trying to do both at the same time. Always, I've been more trying to focus on travel. The travel is the first passion. Everything blogging and the things that I do, these are all to fund my travels. And I enjoy blogging and I really enjoy the community. But the passion is still, traveling and food experiences and stuff around the world. So yeah, I definitely had to slow down a bit if I wanted to see the blog become successful. I could definitely tell the more time that I would sit still in one place and spend time and energy and focus on the blog, that I was getting better results out of it. Where if I was, off traveling around, and a lot of times when I'm traveling, I feel like I'm just putting out fires. If anything feels like it's on fire or anything that needs urgent attention, I'll take care of it. But if I'm traveling, I try to be focused on that.
Yeah, I feel like this was one of the things when we were in Asia, like when we first met you, like we really learned a lot, where it's like, we'd been backpackers before that, and we'd spend like you had said, like a couple of days exploring, a big city, or maybe even like that's all the time we had in one country. And we're kind of like ripping around, and every day is really full. And it's like, when all of a sudden you need to make money to fund what you want to do, it's like you do have to dedicate time to the work aspect of things. And it definitely is like a different lifestyle. Like I think traveling is quite different from like working and traveling, because you do have to budget your time between the actual working, and then also you want to still spend time like exploring and stuff like that. And especially as a content creator like yourself, it's like you want to make sure you're going out and like experiencing a place so that you can write about it, of course.
Well, and in the beginning, I was also doing a lot of freelance writing. So it wasn't even just only work for my own website, because like I said, my website took years before it was able to sustain my travel. So I was doing freelance writing. So I would, get to a new destination, but you still have deadlines from whatever you had committed or whatever assignment you had taken from a publication. So definitely puts a damper on traveling when you arrive in a city and, 12 hours later you have a submittal.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like it's like a catch-22. Hopefully that's the right phrase, where it's like, it's amazing because you get to like live in these places or be in these other places, but then, it's not quite as glamorous as maybe it seems, or it's not quite as glamorous as just being able to travel and not having, deadlines or work obligations or any worries and that type of thing.
Yeah. And that was until I stopped doing freelance. I mean, I might do 1 or 2 freelance pieces a year now, and just focused on my own website, which was a bit difficult before my website was making good money. When someone would get a hold of you with a, decent to well-paid freelance something, and you'd have to, which is like cash in the bank or cash in hand quickly, versus investing that time into your own site, which, will pay off, but it's kind of the long play.
Yeah. How long did you do freelance writing for? Because I think that this is like a really common thing for people, where obviously if you're on the road or you're like across the world, you need to keep making money so you can sustain yourself. And when somebody says, hey, I'll pay you $500 to do this, you're like, yeah, I mean, $500 goes a long way in Thailand, right? Yet at the same time, you make a good point about like, if you are consistently working for other people's blogs or writing for other people, you're not going to have as much time to work on your stuff, which is what's going to pay off in the long term.
I did freelance writing for probably, I don't know, 3 years. I mean, if there's a decent assignment, I'll still take it. Probably 3 or 4 months ago, I took an assignment for Fodor's. So, if something comes along, I don't actively seek out writing assignments anymore. Some publishers and editors that I've worked with previously will still reach out to me occasionally, or, the last one came from a friend. Things like this. So I don't seek out writing assignments anymore. If something well paid or something that I feel like I have a lot of knowledge on comes to me, then I will occasionally take it. But yeah, probably 2 or 3 years I did it, and now I'll take the occasional one-off now if it's a good fit.
Yeah. And so kind of moving back towards the travel side of things, you had kind of talked through spending a lot of time in Southeast Asia, a lot of time in Europe, kind of bouncing a bit back and forth. When did kind of Mexico come into the picture for you? And what kind of led to you changing your home base a little bit towards Mexico and this side of the world?
Well, there were a lot of reasons. I for a long time, I feel like, if you wanted to be a digital nomad, you had to start in Thailand. Like, Mexico it's the neighboring country. I'm from the United States. So, Mexico didn't feel far enough away. It didn't feel, I'm half Mexican, so it doesn't feel super exotic or anything like that, like Thailand did. To be very honest, it was the same. I said earlier that I started dating someone, and that that kind of got me started traveling Europe. When that relationship ended, and we were still kind of back and forth about working it out or not working it out. He was an employee of an airline, and his airline didn't fly to Mexico. So I hope he doesn't listen to this. I've never told him this. So
we'll trust he's not a regular listener of the World Wonders.
Yeah, but when I publish it when I cross promote, he might. Yeah, I thought that by coming to Mexico, I knew his airline didn't fly here. And so I thought that would kind of be the end, and it would put some healthy space between us so that we could, when we've ended up friends now, which was the goal. But, we were kind of in that gray area for a while. And I thought that would kind of close the page on that chapter by coming here.
Okay, that's really interesting. It's interesting because we moved to Mexico right around the same time that you moved to Mexico. We were living in Mexico City, you were living in Merida. But for us, it was like being in Asia had been so awesome, but like having to do visa runs constantly and like these border runs and, all these things in these amazing Asian countries was just getting like a little bit much for us. And we were like, Mexico is warm, it's affordable, it's pretty close to home if we want to travel back to Canada, and we can stay for 6 months. I feel like that was like our reasoning. So it's interesting to hear the difference in choices for moving to the same country.
I mean, all those factored in as well. I get to see a lot more of my friends and family when I'm based in Mexico, because no one was taking like a long weekend to Thailand from the United States or anything like that. And at the time, the visa was appealing, the weather, of course, the food is amazing. And also, once I didn't plan on ever staying this long in Mexico, but once I got down here, I feel like now I've become a huge advocate for people visiting Mexico, because so many people think it's this Cancun or something like this. There's just so much great stuff to do in Mexico. And the longer I'm here, like, I feel like my list of things that I want to see and do just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
And how did you end up deciding to start? Well, actually, I don't know if you did start in Merida or if you had traveled a bit and then settled there. But when you kind of came to Mexico, where did you go first? How did you end up kind of settling down in Merida?
In Merida, the same mutual friends of ours I mentioned earlier, Meg and Tom, were based in Merida. And I came to visit them for, a couple of weeks and check it out. They had been saying a lot of great things about Merida, and came to meet them. And my idea was to kind of go overland, or mostly overland, all the way down to Argentina, start in Mexico and work my way down to South America. And then I got to Merida and just kind of fell in love with it. And I think it's one of the first times I had signed a lease on an apartment, maybe the second time in 4 years at that point that I signed a lease on an apartment and to stay somewhere long term.
Yeah, that's cool to hear. That was kind of like the same for us, like going to Mexico City, like signing like a 6-month lease. I was like, oh, what have we done?
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you've got something longer than a month or two, you're like, I've really committed here. I've like really made a serious commitment.
And then I went back to Merida for like 3 consecutive winters.
Yeah. So did you travel to Europe like all of those summers and then come back to Mexico for the winters? Was that what you did for, I guess, basically that would take us like up till the pandemic?
Yeah, that was I went to Europe for part of this summer, but last summer was the only summer that I did not spend in Europe in the past 8 years.
Oh, wow. And so where did you, or at what point did you kind of decide like, hey, I'm going to get my residency in Mexico and then like work towards my passport?
The residency came because I was, planning on spending a fair amount of time going in and out of Mexico. And even though at that point they were giving out 6-month visas, which are, a little bit harder to come by now, apparently. I think I thought it might help me with getting my passport. At that point, what might have been my thinking. I knew I was eligible. Well, I was told yes and no by whoever you speak to. I was possibly eligible to get a Mexican passport because my grandparents were born here. So I thought it might be easier to convert from being a resident to get to a citizen. Might have been my line of thought.
Okay. And do you want to, tell us a little bit about that process? I know it was a bit of a thing, especially with like COVID happening and stuff, to actually, get your residency and your passport.
That was just the whole issue in itself. They told me it was going to be, very easy. You go to an embassy or consulate. Really all they seemed to care about were financials. I just proved financial solvency. I was in and out of the American side of things in less than an hour. And then I got to Mexico and they told me, you just walk your paperwork in and give it to them and you're going to walk out with residency card. And it was definitely 100% not that easy on the Mexican side. I was literally reduced to tears. There was one day I was almost crying because they just kept, finding little nitpicky things wrong with my application. And then they would send me out and I would correct everything that they told me to correct. And I'd come back and they would find something else that they didn't do. So in one day they had me back and forth to Office Depot, reprinting and printing and everything 6 times in one day. And then finally I got back with what I was sure was going to be the perfectly completed application. And it was like 2:02. And they told me the office had closed at 2. And I was like, no, they're waiting on me. They're expecting me. And they wouldn't let me back in the front door. So they sent me away and I had to come back the next day and start all over. And then very frustratingly, when they were supposed to be printing my card, I had everything finished. This was when they were at the border. There was something going on with people being deported from the United States back into Mexico. And when they were arriving in Mexico, they needed their identification cards. So Merida had ran out of the plastic to print my residency card. It had all been shipped to the border state. So even when I got everything done, I couldn't receive my residency card because of a lack of plastic in the end.
Oh my God.
It's just a very Mexican story.
You said it, not me.
Yeah, I can say that. Yeah, as a Mexican, I can say this. And then
I was thinking it.
Yeah, frustratingly, in the time that they had no plastic and, my application was sitting there approved or my card was approved, just couldn't be printed because of lack of plastic, I had to leave the country. I was going somewhere. And while you're in this like limbo period when you've applied for residency, but you don't yet have the card to enter and leave the country, then I had to show up and do a whole nother interview and pay more money and fees and fines and everything else to get like a temporary permission to leave while I was mid-processing.
Oh my gosh, sounds like such a nightmare. I feel like I'd heard that we'd talked about this when we decided to do residency. And I feel like it was part of the reason we decided to hire a lawyer. Because one of the days that we went in to sign paperwork, I think she had like 5 copies of our paperwork. And she's like, sometimes they're particular about like, certain things like, we have Canadian passports. It's like, is Canada CA or CAN? And so she's like, just sign like all the forms because then one of these they'll accept, And I'm just like, oh man, this is worth the money that we're paying these people to help us out so that we don't have to, like you said, go back and forth between Office Depot. And thankfully we had no plastic shortages during our residency process.
Well, and also someone gave me good advice. They said, if that's why I was trying to get it all done in one day, is because they said different people are particular about different things. So when you're interviewing with one person, what they might be, finicky about, the next person won't even care about. So, my friend was saying, go in one day, get the same person. And if you have to leave and come again or whatever, just make sure you're with the same one person all day. Because, sure enough, I went in the next day and they redlined my application and told me all these things were wrong that I'd brought in that the person had sent me out to correct the day before. So.
Yeah, definitely an ordeal. And then going through the passport was a bit of an ordeal as well, right?
Oh God, the passport was worse than the residency. The passport that was probably my silver lining of COVID, was that, like I said, I didn't go to Europe that summer. I ended up staying in Mexico almost 18 months, I think, which is the longest amount of time I had consecutively stayed in one country. And I finally had time to work on this passport and make it happen. And I had gone through like 2 different attorneys. It took 3 years, thousands of dollars, God knows how much paperwork and documents and forms and things being notarized and apostille certified, being sent back and forth between the United States and Mexico. And my sister was getting hers done as well. So she was flying in and out of Mexico, and I ended up getting an attorney in a different state of Mexico. So, car rentals and hotels and weekend visits to the attorney in the neighboring state and everything. We spent a lot of time, 3 years, and I don't know how many thousands of dollars to finally get this passport.
3 years. That's crazy.
Yeah. And the first attorney was a complete waste of time and money. He got nothing done. I don't know. I look at him now, I feel like he was a fraud. I should have just lit that money on fire.
At least you could have danced around it or something.
Yeah, I had a little bit of warmth in my apartment.
Yeah. And for you, Nathan, apart from obviously the travel benefits that come from having a different passport, you can go to certain different countries without visas and that type of thing. Has having a Mexican passport meant anything to you in terms of just now you've got multiple citizenships, your grandparents are from Mexico, you've kind of built a bit of a life in Mexico as well. Has that side of it how's that been, I guess, is the question?
Well, yeah, I mean, a big reason I've stayed so long in Mexico is I didn't have a lot of exposure to my Mexican heritage growing up. My parents were divorced, and I only saw my Mexican family, once a year usually, and I'd see my dad 2 weeks a year. So I didn't grow up speaking Spanish. I didn't grow up having a lot of exposure to the Mexican part of me. So that's one thing I love about having this passport. It allows me to stay down here long term. I don't have to worry about coming and going. I can stay indefinitely. In the future, if I want to buy property, it makes that a bit easier. But also, we were able to sponsor. My mom's retired here in Mexico, as you guys know. So using my Mexican passport, I was able to sponsor my mom's permanent retirement, which, as we just talked about all the issues getting these residencies and things like this, it saved my mom having to do all that. I think my mom's entire process took less than an hour.
Yeah, that's amazing that you were able to do that. And what a cool thing to be able to give her too, right? Now she can live in a city that has a better climate and that's more affordable, and just give her this cool opportunity to live in another country, which it seems like she really loves it in Mexico. So I think that's awesome. You were able to do that.
Yeah, and not have to, a lot of people that are retiring down here are coming in and out on tourist visas. So my mom doesn't have to worry about coming and going every 6 months. And now in Mexico, they're cracking down on actually giving people 6 months, whereas it used to be pretty much a guarantee. Everyone that came from the States and Canada just automatically got 180 days. And now they're giving people 7 and 10 days. So, she doesn't have to worry about any of this stuff. She can stay down here as long as she wants. And she loves it.
For sure. Yeah. We just actually met up with somebody who was only given 30 days on their return from the US. And that was the first person I'd met. I've been seeing it in all the like Facebook groups and stuff, but that was the first person I'd actually met who told me that they got that. And so we definitely feel grateful to have our residency as well, because it just makes things a bit easier for travel. And especially if you're keeping an apartment and stuff, there's like nothing more stressful than having, you know, a lease on an apartment or somewhere where you live, where all your stuff is, and you go to enter the country and they're like, you have 7 days here. And you're like, what? I live here.
Yeah. I saw it happen to a lot of people in Thailand.
Oh yeah, for sure. I feel like that was one of the things that, I mean, like we've talked about, like we love Thailand as well, but just heard people who were like doing the border crossing every 30 days. It would just cross like Laos, Myanmar, you know, Cambodia for a couple of days, come back. And then one day the border agents are like, you can't come back in. And they're like, all my stuff is here and I live here. So it's a bit stressful.
Yeah, especially if you have to, you know, you shouldn't be living there. You know, if you're there on a tourist visa, it's hard to explain.
Yes, 100%. We do not advocate for illegal activity here on the World Wonders. So we do not promote living long-term in places if you are only on a tourist visa, because anything can happen, like we've talked about. One thing I'm curious about, Nathan, I know you've done like so much growth with your blog and your business over the last couple of years. And you're to the point now where you've got like a small team working with you, which is super, super cool. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, just the growth over the last couple of years and where things are at with your business?
Yeah, the growth, I think for a long time I needed to hire help. And I was really resistant to how much it was going to cost me and giving up part of my income to do it. You know, you've got to get to a point where I guess you're making enough that you're comfortable giving up a little bit of that to outsource some things. And I had started outsourcing some writing. I've had an editor that's worked with me for years, but it was only about April or May when I hired an agency to help me. And then I've really seen some really great growth since I brought on this small team. But yeah, it took about 5 years of blogging before 5 years of blogging before I had a whole team in place. For a long time, probably about year 3, I brought on my editor. So mostly it's been a one-man team as me and an editor for a while. And now I think there's like, you know, at the agency, I think there's like 12 different people on that side that are working on my website.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's really cool to just see, you know, just I guess we've known you for like 5 years. So that's quite a substantial period of time. But just to see like how much growth you've gone through with your business and how well you've been able to like grow your blog. And I mean, it's not, when you talk with bloggers who like have been successful, and I know, you know, a lot of them, we know a lot of them too. We've had lots on our podcast. It kind of sounds like it's easy, but it's not. Like, it's not easy to like rank an article on the internet. Like the internet is a big, vast space with a lot of different stuff on it. And it's not just as simple as like, hey, I write cool content and people pay me for it.
Yeah, and it's getting more and more difficult. I mean, I think it's getting more and more competitive. Maybe during COVID, I think sadly a lot of blogs didn't make it. So we might see a bit of the competition like thin out, sadly, because there are some really great blogs and bloggers that didn't survive, but it's just getting very, very saturated. So even some of the things you can write, you know, great content that is optimized and that you would anticipate doing well. But if you're throwing it into, you know, a huge pool with other people who are doing work that is similar, it's getting more and more difficult for your stuff to rise to the top. And then you're also competing against people who are doing some shady things to make their stuff rise to the top. So it's difficult to compete if you want to keep your hands clean.
Yeah, definitely. And so kind of towards the start of the conversation, we were talking about, you know, that decision to make a big change, to start traveling, having like a solid career, solid life in Oklahoma City, and then looking towards like just feeling like something was missing. Now over the past, I guess it's been 6-7 years, you've been able to build up a solid career, kind of build a life that allows you to travel more, have more adventure. Do you kind of, when you look back on it, do you feel like, you know, you're a lot happier now that this lifestyle is really like a fit for you, or are there still things that you want to, change and that you think about would make your lifestyle fit you better?
One of my really good friends asked me recently, and we'd had a couple of drinks when he asked me, and Mitko asked, he's like, "Are you happy?" And I said, "I'm not happy." And I thought that was a really great answer. And he said, you should be saying, "I am happy." And I feel like, yeah, for the most part, I enjoy what I'm doing. I really enjoy the lifestyle. Blogging is going, fairly well for me. It affords me my lifestyle of travel and things like this. But, am I like Julie Andrews singing on a mountain happy? I don't know about that. I don't know what it would take for me to feel like that happy. But yeah, overall, I feel mostly happy, kind of fulfilled. But when you start, it's almost this like imposter syndrome. And, I've had this conversation with other friends. I think I made a mistake, and something I would tell people is, you need to set markers, or you need to set like a goal, because by any metric that I would have compared myself to when I started blogging, whether it be my income or my social media numbers or my blog traffic, by any metric, I would have thought that these numbers, I would be thrilled to have hit any of these numbers. But now that I've hit these numbers, you're just comparing yourself to the people that are kind of further along than you, or, even God forbid, the people have gotten further along than you faster than you got there. So it's, like they say, like the comparison is the joy of thief, or the thief of joy. So yeah, I'm happy. I'm satisfied with how things are going. Things are trending upwards for the most part. I'm enjoying the ride for the most part, but yeah, I have a bad habit of comparing myself with where I am, where I think I should be, and letting that keep me from being completely happy.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that you see with everybody, but especially in like the digital nomad, community, whatever you want to call it, where just as humans, we get so used to whatever has been going on for us. So something for us, Amanda and I, like sometimes we'll be here in Mexico. It's the end of December, and like the weather won't be quite as perfect as it normally is. And we'll be like, oh, like I wish the weather was better. And then you pull out the phone and you look back in Canada and it's like negative 30 degrees Celsius. But we forget about some of the things that are great about being able to choose when we work, and being able to choose the different places we live in and all the opportunities that are afforded to us. It all just becomes normal after a couple of years.
Yeah. And for me, there's always going to be someone that's, has more traffic, has more followers. I have to stop comparing myself to those people and just kind of be proud of what I have accomplished, and enjoy what's going on with my situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, another thing that I've heard as well is like, when you have sort of a big goal, especially one that's like, hey, I want to make like sustainable income while being able to like work from anywhere in the world. It's like, once you achieve it, you're kind of like, what do I do now? Because you've been working at it for so long. And I feel like that's one thing that like, I really feel like with Mitko's question about like, are you truly happy? I feel like that's one thing that would be, maybe me preventing me from being like Julie Andrews singing on a mountaintop.
Yeah. I think I should have set some like, if I could, have X amount of page views per month or make X amount of income, I might have felt more accomplished, but I never had those. It was, make. And then once you hit that, it's like, okay, how do I get more? This is great, but more is better.
For sure. And so, changing topic a tiny bit as we get close to wrapping up, since we've got a great travel and food blogger on, we've got to get a few recommendations. So Nathan, if someone was listening, and there's certain places where everyone knows the food's great, like everyone knows the food in Italy is great and the food in Mexico is awesome, but where have kind of places that are a little bit more off the map that are actually great food destinations been in your experience, if someone was asking that question?
Well, I think it's starting to get a lot of attention now, and a little bit for food, but for other reasons as well. But the country of Georgia is a great foodie destination. Especially, I love a lot of their fall winter dishes. The Azore Islands of Portugal, I've had some of the best seafood of my life there. I love Vietnam for street food, maybe even more than Thailand. Let me think, where else is great? Oh, Bulgaria. Bulgaria in the summer does amazing, like lighter summer food type dishes. And I think a lot of people know about Greek food, but one place I think has a huge underrated gastronomy. I don't think a lot of people talk about Turkish food. Turkish food is really amazing. And I think a lot of us only know about less than a handful of Turkish dishes. Turkish breakfast should be way more famous than it actually is.
Yeah, I've been watching our mutual friends, Tom and Anna, are in Turkey right now, and they've been posting on Instagram these like elaborate breakfasts. I'm like, oh my God, this is like enough food for the whole day, and it looks amazing.
Tom and Anna write about like adventure type travel or whatever, but Anna is a super foodie. Anna's a very good foodie traveler. The Turkish breakfast is insane. I don't know why it's not a bigger thing around the world. It's kind of like almost like breakfast tapas. It's just a whole bunch of different bites of smaller dishes. So you get a little bit of everything, and they just put like this massive spread in front of you. It's incredible.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. There's a couple countries in there that we haven't been, so they're already on the list and stuff. But yeah, definitely would agree with a lot of the places that you did mention, especially Greece. I feel like Greek food has a very special place in my heart. It's kind of like, I feel like Greek food for me is kind of like dessert for some people. Like, when people are like, oh, I'm so stuffed, and then dessert comes out and they're like, I still have space for this. I feel like that's me with like some really good like feta cheese or something like that.
Someone told me dessert. One of my friends told me there's always room for dessert because dinner goes to your stomach and dessert goes to your heart.
I love that. Amazing. And so if people want to learn more about you, Nathan, follow along with your journey, all that good stuff, where can they go to find that?
FoodieFlashpacker.com or Foodie Flashpacker across all social media channels.
Amazing. And you're going to be in Puerto Vallarta for the next couple of months if anyone's passing through. That's right?
Yeah, I should be here till like April or May until it's time to head back to Europe.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's fun to have you officially on the show and hear a little bit more about your travel journey.
No, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanders Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.